Hi, it's Paulie here. So this one is a history for our intersex colleagues. A warning before I begin, this is a story that needs to be told and really needs to be remembered, but it is grim. So, warnings for genital mutilations and unaliving, okay? However, it does bring us to some very important points, and one of those is that forced sexual surgeries upon intersex people when they are children is an abomination, and also that you cannot turn a cis kid trans. The science is in. That doesn't work, it doesn't happen. They tried it and it was a disaster. Alright, so 1965 in Ontario, a couple, the Renners, had two babies. They had twin boys, Bruce and Brian. Now, these babies had a thing called phimosis. Now, for our American cousins who are usually circumcised, phimosis is where the foreskin will not retract properly away from the head of the penis, which it normally just naturally does. It just means that the opening is too tight to do it, but it can cause a problem with urination and it can cause big problems with infections, and it is usually easily and naturally fixed, literally by stretching that skin. It is hellishly stretchy. It's just something you have to do. It's just a natural thing, naturally handled. However, Northern America being Northern America, they decided, let's circumcise these kids and solve it. Now, circumcision is normally done with a scalpel or a sharp instrument. Bafflingly, the doctor decided to do this by cauterization. Yeah, that's right. He took basically a red-hot flaming iron and decided to burn off the skin. He did it on Bruce, and in so doing, permanently mutilated the kid's penis. From the research I've been able to do, being the 60s, they're very coy on the exact amount of damage, but he severed the kid's penis. He literally burnt the entire end off and just burned this thing to a ruin. It was severed and non-functional. Huge panic. Enter John Money. Bit of a monster would be my kindest description of this bastard. So he was a psychologist and sexologist at Johns Hopkins University. What he did was went into consultation with the Reimers, and he pushed on them the concept that wee Brucey would be happiest in life if they were raised as a girl, because no penis. It was in the kid's best interest. So they decided to run with it. So this child was then put into surgery. They castrated them, removed their testicles, removed whatever vestiges of penis remained. They had to open a hole into this kid's abdomen to allow a channel for urination. That's how much penis was gone. And they constructed a very rudimentary vulva and vaginal opening for this poor kid, and decided they were going to be socialized. Now, what had set Money absolutely alight was this, to him, was a giant experiment. Because here's the thing. John Money was part of a fashionable movement at the time which was saying that gender is entirely a social construct. Now, you will sometimes hear some trans commentators and so on saying gender is a social construct. Yes and no. It is more nuanced than that, but gender identity is very, very real and can exist outside of socialization, and that's what the Reimer case very, very clearly proves. But he was someone who had the theory and is looking to create evidence to support the theory, not someone that is doing scientific method and looking at observable facts and formulating a theory from those facts. To him, this was a golden opportunity because it's twin children, both boys, uterine twins, share the same genetics, share the same rooms, share the same family, the same upbringing, the same environment. And if he can turn one of them female simply through socialization, this proves his theory. And this is what he worked at. So Bruce was now given the name Brenda and was raised as a girl. Once they hit puberty, they were given estrogen treatments to encourage the growth of breasts, and they were entirely socialized as a girl. 2 strings of nightmares began to develop. First off, the child never felt that they were female. They fought against it. They wanted to wear male clothes. They wanted to socialize as male. Their female socialization was forced on them. They were very heavily bullied at school and socially for the male aspects of their presentation and socialization. It was a nightmare. And here's the other nightmare. So John Money, seeing this as a long-running experiment, wants to keep tab on these 2 children. Let's be really clear about this. 2 children. They were brought into his offices for regular treatments, they were called. Now, Brenda, later David, when they came out of this nightmare, did substantial interviews with Rolling Stone magazine and substantial reminiscences and records in books, both technical and personal, as biographies. What John Money did was monstrous, and this has been backed up by their brother. It isn't just David / Brenda's imagination. No, the 2 kids both absolutely agree on this. What John Money would do is bring them in and get them to sexually explore each other. Strip off, inspect each other's genitals, touch and play with each other's genitals, and simulate sex with each other, including having them down in missionary position and thrusting, which he decided was just simply simulating normal sexual play amongst youngsters, so he's just encouraging normal sexual developmental play. Yes, because my kids always ended up naked, faming missionary sex with each other. It's like, yeah. I have to drink, sorry. These sessions were often just watched by Money, but sometimes he had up to 6 students and colleagues in the room at the same time. If the boys refused to cooperate, they received verbal abuse, were shouted and screamed at, and forced into this play. When David / Brenda reached 13, they said they would kill themselves if they were taken in for these treatments again. Threatened suicide if they were ever brought in to see John Money ever again. Puberty was working out very, very badly for Brenda, and at 15 the parents finally confessed and gave this child the information of what had happened, that they had been born entirely male with male genitalia, had been surgically altered, and then was being put into a forced transition as a girl. The child instantly rebelled. They went into surgery to have their breasts removed and other surgeries to get a penoplasty to try and get a replacement penis made, and heavy testosterone treatments to try and re-establish themselves with a male physical presentation. They were deeply damaged for the rest of their life. They could not obviously trust any medical professionals or people, definitely couldn't trust parents, had been drastically mis-socialised, so felt completely out of place. Nightmarish. And things every bit as bad for their brother. The enforced sexual behaviour caused Brian massive mental trauma for the rest of his life. Now, remember, this is living memory. These kids are younger than I am. So this nightmare is going up through the 90s for them. Finally, in the 90s, Brian just couldn't take it anymore and just, I'm sorry to say, unalived himself. Took an overdose of antidepressants and died. Brenda, who had changed their name to David the moment they had the opportunity to become male again, had actually gone out and managed to live a life. They had married a single mother of 3 and had managed to live for quite some time in a very ordinary male existence, however deeply traumatised by what money had done to them. However, in 1997, David's wife asked for a divorce, and 2 days later he unalived himself via firearm. Sorry. That's not the end of the story. John Money used this successful experiment to propagandize and push for the forced surgical reassignment of intersex children. He pushed this whole thing as an entirely successful experiment. He published papers, he wrote books, he did talks. He pushed this as entirely successful. He had taken someone that was born entirely male, had forcibly surgically changed them into a female and socialized them as female, therefore they were female. Case closed. So therefore we can just simply choose what sex a child is going to be and just make them it. Against their inclinations, against their own beliefs. Now, I will say this again for the people out the back. Gender comes in 2 very clear streams, okay? Perceived and actual. This is the science, ladies and gentlemen. Perceived gender is what other people perceive you as when they see you. Actual gender is the gender that you personally identify as. It is deeply, intensely personal and is extremely real. When there is a gap between perceived and actual, that is what we call gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is treated by attempting to bring your perceived and actual genders closer together. We change the way we look, we take hormones, we do whatever we need to try and stop that dysphoria. In this case, the Reimers both were born as boys, and David Reimer, no matter what surgery, no matter what socialization was enforced on him, his perceived gender was male. It was there, he knew. And we have lots of neurological science coming in to show that mental pathways and so on are definitely different between male and female. In his heart, in his soul, in his neurology, he was male, and he bloody well knew it. This experiment was used to justify hundreds of thousands of surgeries hundreds of thousands of genital mutilations of children who presented with different genitalia. Some people, are born with both, vulvas, penises, testicles. There are many, many, many intersex variants. But this was used to just have parents arbitrarily make a decision and chuck a kid into a socialisation without ever letting the kid grow into an identity and let the world know who they were and what they wanted. Reimer's parents actually aided and abetted this, because in their communications with money was told that all was well, that this was working, that this was positive. So there was definitely a collusion there, which the parents then reneged on in later years. But at the time, it seems that they were telling the research team, all plain sailing, this is great. 2 people died who didn't have to. 2 people were brutalised by a psychologist with a point to prove. So what did we learn from this whole vicious experiment? Well, we learned that you cannot arbitrarily take a cis kid and magically turn them trans. That's what the experiment proves. The thing that right-wing pundits scream on about how kids are being seized and somehow magically forced to be trans, is complete fucking bollocks. It is a non-starter, folks. Doesn't happen. It was tried. It does not work. You cannot make someone trans if they are not trans. They are or they aren't. You can't make someone trans. What else did we learn? Genitalia does not determine your gender. Proven right there. What did we also learn from this? Children know their gender, no matter how hard you try to gaslight them. If you've got a kid that says they're transgender, they're transgender. If you've got a kid that was born male or female and clearly is set on being the other gender, they know. Kids know. What else do we learn? Conversion therapy is abuse. It is torture, and it also does not work. Does not work. We learned that gender reassignment surgery forced onto infants is abuse. These are all useful things to have learned. I don't believe 2 people should have had to die in order to prove these things. The intersex community are very, very real. I have intersex friends. I have several intersex friends. These people have a right to self-determination. They have a right to tell you what their gender is, be it one, the other, or a blending of many different factors. It's their business and not ours to impose upon them. Let us hope that we've seen the last of John Moneys out there attempting to brutalise children in order to prove a point. The right wing lost this one. You will see this argument being framed as, aha, see, they tried transing someone and they essentially lie about the message, the right wing, because they say that they tried transing David and didn't work, therefore being trans is a fantasy. It isn't. David was always male, and David knew it. I'm very sorry for the hell that they were put through, and I fight for trans rights, but I fight for the rights of our intersex friends as well. And their fight is mine. We will work to make a better world. Anyway, just something I thought you should all hear about.